Great. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. And welcome to Washington, Governor Hassan. It's
Thank you very much.
a pleasure to have you here. One of the things that I've been thinking about is something that occurs to me every 4 years, which is that there's 50 states in the Union and none of them is quite like New Hampshire.
I'm glad you recognize that.
So what are the things that enable so many women office holders to thrive and succeed in the Granite State?
Well, I am very proud as a Granite Stater of the way we approach self-governance in public life, which is that we just have an incredible culture and history of civic engagement and lots of opportunity for it. As you know, I will be part of the first all-female and all-democratic federal legislation in the history of our country. And one of the reasons that we see so many women in leadership in New Hampshire, I think, is just the sheer opportunity for women to engage, whether it's at school board, a conservation commission, or in our state legislature, which you may know consists of 400 members who are all volunteers. They get paid $100 a year. And so that really gives people a chance to kind of try public service out and see how they like it. And I think what happens is that women discover that they're good at it, that they make a difference, that they can engage with other people well and problem solve. And that really leads to more and more women getting involved. And you know, when I was sworn in as governor in 2013, I was sworn in by a female Chief Justice in a ceremony presided over by a female Speaker of the House. At that point in time, too, we had just elected our first all-female federal delegation. And that's very common in New Hampshire, just this sense that everybody pitches in, and as long as you're willing to work hard, we really don't look very much beyond that.
So you got your start in the state legislature, but before you entered the Senate, you ran and lost. And although the Norman Rockwell version of this is you're the local diner or the coffee store, and a constituent walks up and tells you what a great job you're doing, that there's another version of this, which is that there are 400 legislators, and each of them has several thousand constituents who want to tell them what they're doing wrong, loudly, insistently, and even when they're looking for their own private moments. Why would you run a second time, having put yourself forward for the state Senate and experience the rough and tumble of politics?
Well, so first of all, and I think this is helpful, especially for women to hear who might be considering running for office. We had redistricting in New Hampshire in 2002, so we didn't really know what our legislative districts were going to look like till late. And I got a call almost literally at the 11th hour from the chair of the Democratic Party in New Hampshire saying, all of a sudden there's nobody running for state Senate in this seat. Would you be willing to run? We all think you'd be good at it. I had been on an education financing commission. And then she said at the end of the conversation, and by the way, you have 24 hours to decide because that's the filing deadline. And I called my husband and listed all the reasons that it wasn't going to work. Our kids were 9 and 13. Our oldest has very severe disabilities. I had a part-time law practice, and I commuted some to Boston for that practice, and he had a very busy job. And I went through the whole list, and my husband said, but you know, you'd be really good at it, so we'll make it work. So that's a little bit of a piece of advice to women who are considering this. You know, surround yourself with people who will support you in this endeavor. It makes a big difference. And then secondly, as to your question, I was absolutely convinced from the campaign in 2002 that my district was a centrist problem-solving district. And the incumbent who I lost to in 2002 was really very far to the right of that. And I really felt that if I'd had more time and experience to have that conversation with voters and make my case and engage them more, that they would choose a different state senator just because I felt that the incumbent was such a bad fit for that district. And in fact, that's what happened in 2004.
Let me back you up a moment there. Aside from the Democratic Party operating with its usual organization and foresight and springing the question on you with 24 hours to go, you also said that you had gotten into this in part through educational advocacy, right? Working as an advocate for your son, getting involved in educational finance. Talk about that transition, right? Because there's one version of political engagement, which is getting involved in an issue that you feel passionately about, and you're out there pushing for the best possible solution. There's another version of political engagement, which involves going to a state legislature and making a series of painful compromises and learning a whole lot about issues about which you never previously cared. Right. And you made that leap from one to the other, and that's often a difficult leap for women in politics to make.
Yeah. Well, I think what has always been important to me is, I guess for me, the advocacy I did around including children with disabilities in public schools, and also in making sure that families who included children or family members with disabilities could also be included in the community and could also have a typical life. That experience really, for me, was just a model of what democratic small d progress means, which is that our founders set out the principle that every single one of us counts, that every single American, every single Granite Stater matters. And they didn't really count everybody at first, right? But they had the confidence that over the course of generations, we would bring more and more people in from the margins, which is good for the cause of human dignity and freedom, to be sure, but they also knew it would unleash a kind of talent and energy that would build a more successful community, democracy, and economy, and so that it was important to everybody's success. So that model for me is a model that I found myself wanting to bring to other conversations. It's not just about people with disabilities. It's not just about making sure we have, gender equity. It's not just about diversity. It's about strengthening everyone. And so the transition for me just was along those lines, which is the job in American life of public service is to engage and problem solve in a way that just unleashes more and more talent and energy so that everybody can thrive.
Often when I talk to women in elective office, they present their careers in just this way, as a series of problems that they set out to solve, of achievements that they have racked up, of working collaboratively and cooperatively, often across partisan lines. Stop me if this isn't a fair way to characterize what you've just said. Do you see that pattern too, that women often run on a record of achievement, maybe even more than male candidates tend to?
Well, I think women tend to get involved because they want to make a difference about a particular issue, or they've had an experience that has made them feel like people are ignoring a particular issue that's not only important to them and their families, but usually to their community, the greater community too. And so I think that generally has been the draw for women, which is, how do I fix something, as opposed to, gee, this is something I've always wanted to do.
So the way you're painting this, it leaves this question. You've just joined, what's often called the nation's most exclusive club. There's just 100 United States senators. Of course, there's a club within that club of the women in the United States Senate, which is not the 50% of the population that is true of the nation at large, quite a bit smaller. Right. Given what you've just laid out, women going out there, solving problems, moving from their own communities to broader elective office, why is this trajectory so comparatively rare?
Well, I'll start by just saying that I think, first of all, balancing the things that women generally balance, family, community, career, and doing it under the microscope of a very competitive political race is still something that women don't have that much experience doing. And I think it's really, we need to have more women run for office at all levels. So as women, we see other successful women doing this and being successful and being able to get through a campaign that can be contentious and difficult and occasionally personal. And I think the more we do it, the more we will see people succeed. That's one of the things about New Hampshire, is the more we have seen women run. As somebody who looked at the research once said to me, the more you elect women, it kind of gets contagious. And it isn't, I don't think it's a surprise that, Hillary Clinton back in 2008 won the primary in New Hampshire. New Hampshire voters were used to women leaders. I don't think it's an entire surprise that Jean Shaheen and I have both been governors and now senators. I think that that's something that people in our state have seen and gotten used to. So I think if we can help more women run, I think we will see more women become governors, more women become senators, more women become leaders throughout. I am reminded that I was calling a colleague, a state senator, after I first became governor about some issue, and he called me back later. I tried to reach him on his cell phone, and he has 2 daughters, and it turns out he was driving when I called, and the 2 daughters were in the car with him, and they saw that it was me calling, and they said, "Dad, the governor's calling you." And he said, I'll call her back when I'm not driving. So, smart, right? So then one of them said, "Dad, have you ever considered being governor?" And he said, "Well, you know, people ask me from time to time whether I want to run for governor, and I've thought about it. What do you girls think?" And one of his daughters said, "Well, no, you can't do that." And he said, "Why?" And they said, "Because you're not a girl." And which tells you, I mean, here are these young girls who've really, you know, I was the first governor that they were really aware of. And that's actually not an uncommon, you know, kids in New Hampshire generally do not see this as an anomaly.
Role models are incredibly important. It reminds me that my daughter asked me at one point this fall why there are no women presidents. Was it because women weren't strong enough or because they weren't smart enough?
Yeah.
What lesson do you take away from this presidential election?
Well, I first of all want to remind especially young women and girls that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. So she is the first woman in United States history not only to be her party's, a major party's nominee, but to win the popular vote for the presidency. And as heartbreaking for those of us who supported her found the election result, I don't think we should lose sight of that. And part of the real lesson in public life is that tenacity and persistence matter. Taking a hit from time to time and not having things go your way is a part of this process. And it doesn't mean you stop trying. And that really, you know, I always go back again to my roots as an advocate for my family, which is that, you know, the reason my son was included in public schools in Exeter, New Hampshire, was because generations of families and their advocates before the Hassan family pushed hard at a time when most people thought my son, whose name is Ben, and he's really handsome and smart, Ben is 28, and he can't speak, he can't walk, he can't really use his hands. So communication is very limited. He can raise a hand to say yes. A couple of generations ago, people would have thought that he had no cognitive ability because he couldn't communicate. We have come so far, but it has not been a straight trajectory, and it has not been without struggle. And you can pass a lot of good policies, but if you don't work on a daily basis about implementing them, they won't really have much meaning. Passing a law that says all children like my son have a right to a free and appropriate education is a monumental step that took a lot of advocacy and a lot of examples. But implementing that over the course of time is really hard. I mean, including somebody as disabled as my son is in your home is really hard work. And so is democracy. And that's one of the things that I think we can't lose sight of. And I actually think it's one of the strengths that women bring to the role. Because many times in our lives, things have not been a straight trajectory. And we get up the next day and we go forward. And that's really what I take from this election. We made great progress, but nobody is immune from disappointment, and nobody is immune from a complex election cycle where there were a lot of different forces at play and a lot of different things happening. And we get up the next day and we move forward because we have learned from this, and we have shown that a woman can, in fact, not only be a nominee, but win the popular vote.
You're moving forward now from a role as an implementer, a role as
Yeah.
somebody who's working in an executive capacity, and going back to work as a legislator, and not just a legislator, but one in an embattled minority. How, what are the different skills that those roles call for?
Well, I'm really excited about my new role, and I also love being governor. And so one of the things that I think is really important is remembering that it is possible, and governors do this a lot, to work across party lines and get things done. And so in New Hampshire in the last 4 years, my first term, we have 2-year terms in New Hampshire. My first term, I had a Republican Senate, a Democratic House. My second term, I had Republican majorities in both chambers. That being said, we were still able to balance 2 budgets in a fiscally responsible way, holding the line against a sales and income tax, which is really important to Granite Staters. We still invested in critical economic priorities. We settled major litigation around our behavioral health system and move forward in reinvesting in community-based behavioral health. We managed to come together and fund critical transportation infrastructure, bipartisan development. We came together and passed a bipartisan Medicaid expansion program, so now over 50,000 hardworking Granite Staters have access to health care, including behavioral health and substance abuse treatment. We got emergency funding passed at the state level and changed a number of critical laws at the state level to combat our heroin and opioid crisis. And we actually froze college tuition at our public universities for the first time in 25 years and lowered it at our community colleges. So it is possible to get things done across party lines. And I think it's one of the reasons, as a sitting governor, I made the decision to run, because I think we can do a lot at the state level, and it's really critical. Governors do incredibly critical work with their state legislatures. But if Washington is unable to take the same approach, there's only so much you can do as governor. And I'm looking forward to adding to the caucus of senators who have been governors, because I think, again, it's a bipartisan group, and we have experience about how what happens here really impacts people in their daily lives, that we understand in a very direct and precise way.
So many of your colleagues in the Senate are facing something of a dilemma at the moment, where they may be inclined to this kind of bipartisan cooperation, but they're faced with the prospect of cooperating with a chief executive who ran a campaign that many of them abhor, that they feel, particularly on issues of gender, that he represented himself and through his words and his past conduct in ways that some of them feel disqualifies him from the presumption of good faith or cooperation, whereas others are inclined to see what they can accomplish. Where do you come down on that?
Well, I think the relationship between the president and the Congress is obviously one that is still forming and evolving. I will never fail to stand up to Donald Trump around critical issues of principle, or when I think it is in the best interests of my constituents in New Hampshire to do so. They elected me to bring New Hampshire values and New Hampshire pragmatism to Washington. I also know how important it is that we continue to find ways to make progress wherever we can. So when it is in the interests of my state and my country to work with the president-elect, I will do that. When I think he is violating our basic values and tenets, I will certainly stand up to him.
We'll move to audience questions in a moment, but before we do that, I just want to ask, there are many women in this audience who perhaps are contemplating running for public office themselves. And I wondered if you can tell me 2 things. What the biggest delight or surprise of actually doing that was for you, but also what the thing that you had to give up that cost you the most was?
Oh, my goodness. So first of all, as I have often said, other than marrying my husband and having my children, running for public office is the best thing I have ever done. And so people should just know what an opportunity it presents. It particularly presents itself in a state like New Hampshire, but I am quite certain the experience is replicated in each state's unique way across our country. The opportunity to engage with your fellow citizens about things that matter to them is extraordinary. And when you are running for office and then when you serve in office, people are so willing to share with you what their lives are like, what matters to them, what their hopes and dreams are. It is just an extraordinary honor, and you learn something from those conversations every single day. And it makes you, it helps you develop a more complete outlook. I think it makes you a better problem solver, a better person. And you end up, if you're doing it well, you end up growing no matter where you started from. If you do it well, the people of your state and you grow together around certain issues. It is a challenge to learn also, just as people are sharing with you, to share your own personal self with others. Especially if, like a lot of women, I suspect, I don't want to overgeneralize, you've been raised not to make a fuss and not to draw attention to yourself. And so that's one of the, that's one of the things you have to work on. But it is an extraordinary, extraordinary experience. And even in the heat of disagreeing with people passionately in governing, again, they are sharing themselves with the people of the state and with each other to try to make things better. And that's what ultimately makes me so optimistic about our future.
And worth the price of a public that feels it owns a part of you, or is entitled to
again, New Hampshire is a very interactive and engaged place. And so, by the time you've campaigned for any office, but especially statewide office, you've met a lot of people, and they don't ask anything from you that they don't ask of themselves.
Right. Well, we've got a few minutes here. Some questions.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Denise Ferriozzi with Emily's List. Thank you for everything you've done and will do. I have a question about running as a woman, running for a legislative office versus executive office. We've obviously seen a lot of progress, not enough, in Congress and in state legislatures, but have been halted at executive office. And as someone who's run successfully for both, I'm wondering if you saw, if the voters of New Hampshire, you think, evaluated you differently for those jobs.
Well, I certainly think that women are still perceived differently. And I do think that at times, at least, we are held to higher standards. And I think we don't have as much experience in daily life and in business having women chief executives. So again, I think it goes back to people doing it more and more, and citizens having role models themselves to see. I have held, I was in the state Senate too, so I've held both legislative and executive office. And I think one of the things that's true about New Hampshire is that even the chief executive in New Hampshire, the way our government is structured really requires a very collaborative approach, because governors have a lot of legislative oversight, and we have something called the Executive Council, which has to vote on much of what we do too. So I think we may be a unique place in that regard, but I do think that we still need to see more women become chief executives so people get more used to it. But again, I think Hillary's run has really helped people see a very strong, able person, and they clearly believe she'd make a very able chief executive.
Thank you. Hi, Jessica Grounds with Project Mind the Gap. Governor Hassan, you ran in a very high-profile race against another woman candidate. How did that change the strategy for your team at all? Did it change your strategy in any way, running against another woman? And also, did it bring up issues impacting women and gender differently, do you think, during the course of the race? And lastly, I would just say, do you feel badly at all that you took out one of the few Republican women in the Senate?
The answer there is no. But look, I ran for this office because I really believed New Hampshire wasn't being represented in the way it needed to by my opponent, whose service I appreciate very, very much. And I appreciate the significance of the campaign we just ran. And my opponent and I have known each other a while, and but I ran for this seat because I really believed that we need to help continue to grow a thriving middle class. We need to support innovative businesses. We need to keep our country strong, safe, and secure. But we need to make sure that we are also protecting a woman's right to make our own reproductive health decisions, for example, and that we need to keep moving forward and improving the Affordable Care Act and addressing some of its shortcomings. But I ran for this seat because I really believe we need to bring the New Hampshire way of getting things done and investing in people and growing the middle class to Washington. And that continues to be what I'll focus on here. I do think that a high-profile race between two women meant that I thought that there was a narrative about the race, about it being particularly negative, that I'm not sure they would have written about two men running against each other. And so, it was a tough race, but it was a high-profile race in a hotly contested seat in a very close election in a purple state. And so I do think that we continue to see female and male candidates perceived somewhat differently and addressed somewhat differently. And again, I think the more women run and the more we point out those moments when we really don't think, for instance, the coverage is focusing on the appropriate things or in a gender neutral way, that we'll continue to see progress there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you very much.